We'll be discussing the impeachment investigation. We don't know yet if that investigation will lead to an actual impeachment, but we will discuss the impeachment process and how the president's behavior threatens the Congress and the Constitution and threatens communities here in Brooklyn and across the United States, and how it threatens the president himself and his supporters, and also the outcome of the 2020 elections. The impeachment of Donald Trump. This is Brooklyn 45, and my guest is United States Congresswoman Yvette Clarke.
Thank you for having me, Sam. It's great to be back.
You know, we'll be discussing the 2020 census as well.
Absolutely.
But let's
critical.
talk about this impeachment. What exactly is a formal impeachment?
Well, right now, what we have embarked upon, you may have heard in terminology, is an impeachment inquiry. And this came about because we received information from a whistleblower, we received a memorandum from the White House, and we received some details of a telephone call that took place between Donald Trump and the president of Ukraine. And over a period of time, we had seen some behavior from Donald Trump that was of concern to the Congress. And that behavior was the holding back of funding that had already been allocated through the United States Congress to help the Ukrainians to protect themselves against already hot war on their land with Russia. And so when Donald Trump held back on that funding, you heard a lot of senators speaking out about the need to expedite that, not knowing that there was this quid pro quo, there was this conversation taking place between the ambassador to the UN and, to the EU, Mr. Volker, who was the Ukrainian diplomat, the diplomat from the US to the Ukraine, as well as a whole host of others within the Trump administration about a quid pro quo. So once we received that information, a formal impeachment inquiry went into full effect. Now, your question was, what is an impeachment? And it's a constitutional tool that is given to the United States Congress if they find that they have a president in office who is guilty or has demonstrated to the American people high crimes and misdemeanors. And what our inquiry does is it lays out the facts before the American people. We uncover all that has been hidden or obstructed by the Trump administration in an attempt to lay plain to the American people what those violations have been.
Have you been able to do that as yet?
How
long is it going to take?
Right. Well, right now you may have heard Speaker Nancy Pelosi talk about the fact that we have 3 different committees of jurisdiction with that are taking the lead on this particular article, if you will. There are also other committees that have some jurisdiction. So we're talking about the Intelligence Committee, we're talking about the Government and Oversight Committee, we're talking about the Judiciary Committee. We also, given the international nature of this violation, of this crime, quite frankly, have the Foreign Affairs Committee that is also a part of the conversation here. These committees all have to exert their jurisdiction, bring before them various members of the administration, subpoena those individuals if they don't come willingly, speak to whistleblowers in the case of this Ukraine incident, and present that again to members of Congress and the American people so that we can make an informed decision and an informed present to the American people a pathway of what we see as violations of the United States Constitution.
The American people, how do they factor into all this?
Well, again, the tool of impeachment is given by the Constitution to the Congress.
Okay.
The Congress represent the people,
Okay.
right? And so members are educating their constituencies about what is taking place right now. And as those constituencies become more informed and educated, that will give the support to members of Congress to add to the debate with respect to impeachment on Capitol Hill.
Now, when you say your constituencies, you're talking about your constituency here in Brooklyn?
That's right.
Or
Well,
a
I mean,
larger
when we say
constituency as well?
constituencies, there are 435 members of Congress, right? Each member will have a vote on impeachment.
Okay.
Once we finish the inquiry will then lead to articles of impeachment, which can then be brought to the floor as part of a formal impeachment proceeding.
Your president, our president, calls this a witch hunt. What is your response to that?
Well, Donald Trump is a master of distraction, of disillusionment. When he protests, you're heading down the right path, because his goal is to distract you enough so that he can continue to perpetuate a false narrative about who he truly is.
A lot of people are asking the question, what are the odds of him being impeached?
Well, listen, again.
You said there were many committees. Do they all have to agree?
No, they all have to present the evidence, and they're all going about it differently. All members, ultimately, you need a majority in the House of Representatives. And we already have that majority asking for the impeachment inquiry.
And this majority is not just a Democratic majority?
It's primarily a Democratic majority. We have one Republican who has agreed to an impeachment inquiry.
Okay. So he says...
That makes it bipartisan.
It sure does. He's saying that the Democrats are trying to sway public opinion.
Right.
And that the Republicans are not on board with this at all, and that the American people are not on board with this at all. How do the Democrats sway the American public?
The Democrats put the facts before the American people. We have a whole host of public hearings that will be widely distributed, widely televised. In those proceedings, questions will be asked of individuals about their role, responsibility, and participation in what has already been documented as pressuring, as extorting from the Ukrainian president an investigation into an opponent of Donald Trump's in the upcoming election. The request to dig up dirt of a foreign foreign government
Yes.
is in itself a violation of the Constitution of the United States.
You spoke earlier about the 2020 elections. Are Democrats afraid, or some Democrats afraid, that they're going to lose their seats if they continue to pursue this impeachment?
Well, I think that, again, there's a process here. People have to remember this new Congress was sworn in January. It hasn't even been a year yet. Many of my colleagues won in districts that Donald Trump won his election through in 2016. And so you have new members of Congress who are becoming acquainted with their constituencies, who ran on issues having to do with bread and butter, with health care, with climate change, a whole host of issues, but primarily high health care, quite frankly. And here you have as a backdrop a president that has gone rogue, who has demonstrated that he's only looking after his own interests, he's self-dealing, and this flies in the face of our democratic values. And so they're in the process now of engaging their constituents.
Yes.
You'll hear about town hall meetings all across the nation. And it's being able to make sure that at every step that we're taking,
Yes.
they're getting feedback and they're informing their constituents.
Lots of people are saying enough is enough. Both people who want to get President Trump out of office and those people who want him to remain in office. How do you deal with these two divergent views?
Well, my role and responsibility, first and foremost, is to the people of the 9th Congressional District of New York. And we've gotten a lot of feedback within our constituency about their concerns. The 9th Congressional District of New York has been, quite frankly, in the bullseye of every immoral policy that Donald Trump has pursued from day one, whether it is the Muslim ban or whether it's addressing the whole immigration concern, from public charge to DACA to temporary protected status, the type of everyday assault that my constituents have been under, the deregulation of carbon dioxide in the air and what that means for those of us who are concerned about climate change, having experienced firsthand Superstorm Sandy, the breaking down of the healthcare system. There are a whole host of ways in which Donald Trump has demonstrated that he's an existential threat to everything that we hold dear and to the moral basis that holds our nation together as a democracy. So my constituents have been on board for quite some time. As a matter of fact, I called for the impeachment of Donald Trump the day after the Women's March.
I was going to ask you about the
Absolutely.
legislation.
Absolutely. After the day after the Women's March. So it really has to do with different parts of the population and how we sort of create a baseline for everyone to understand what's at stake here. And that's what my colleagues are doing in different parts of the country
In
as
their
we
own
speak.
constituencies as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm still curious about this whistleblower or these whistleblowers.
Yes.
Are we going to hear from more whistleblowers?
It's being said that there are many more. The current attorney for the whistleblower has been contacted by other federal employees. So, I think people recognize that it is critical to our democracy that people stand up and speak out with what they know, if indeed it is in the best interest of our country for them to do so. No one wants to step forward with false information and then be dragged through the public having lied or perpetuating false information, right? So you have to realize that, and I think the public has to realize that when someone decides that they're going to come forward as a federal employee, this is something we have to take extremely seriously. This is an individual whose life can be turned upside down as a result of coming forward.
I want to talk about impeachment some more, but I want to get to 2020 because 2020 is very important.
Absolutely.
You referred to the 2020 election, but let's talk a bit about the 2020 census and how important that is.
Absolutely. Well, here again, we saw that the Trump administration was trying to tamper with a process that has been, held harmless from its inception. And that's because it's critical for us to know how many people reside in the United States of America, irrespective of status. With that knowledge, we're able to provide the type of financial support from the federal government that is required for us to live, a civilized life, for us to live in a way in which the support that we require is there for us. So when you count the number of people that that live in the United States of America. You know where to site hospitals. You know how many classrooms need to be established in a given community. You know how to market to certain parts of the population. There are just so, you know how many housing units are needed to support, the domiciling of people who live within your borders. These are all very important things to the American way of life. When the census is inaccurate, when we don't count everyone, when there's a severe undercounting, it then creates a dynamic where, first of all, it's like fake news, right? Because now, based on an erroneous number, resources are now being shifted about the United States.
Yes.
And that shifting of resources can be to the detriment of communities like mine that are hard to count communities. Communities like the 9th Congressional District, where you have a large immigrant population, you have a large population of people of African descent who typically are hard to count populations, and where you have new people moving into the community, development taking place. So if the census is not accurate in counting, how will we know how many housing units need to be developed in a particular area and what those specific populations need? If the wealthiest of the 9th Congressional District fill out the census, but the least wealthy do not, you're saying you're not here. You're saying there's no need for services that suit your concerns or your needs. And those who are wealthier will continue to see services come in that are reflective of their presence. So that's why the census is so very important. At the end of the day, it also determines the representation within certain communities, because those numbers then determine how many people are seated in the United States House of Representatives, how districts are then drawn for state and municipal legislative bodies. All of that is impacted by how accurate we are in counting the population across the United States.
How do you allay the fears of the undocumented? You said earlier that everyone should participate in the census. But how do you tell people there is no need to be afraid?
Well, because I think that the times that we're in call for courage. If you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, you better be damned if you do. Because at the end of the day, we live in blended families. And there may be a parent that's undocumented, but their child was born in the United States. And if you and that child are not counted, that child, the idea of them getting a quality education becomes a moot issue. That quality education then is shifted to another part of the United States where people are saying, we're here.
It's important for them to know that.
Absolutely. It's critical. It's power. The census is power, and that's what I try to explain to people. Right now, we are living in a climate where fear is used as weaponized. And what I'm saying to the people of the 9th District of New York is, we're more courageous than that. We look at fear in the eye and we move forward. And this is a time for us to stand up. What's going to happen as a result of the 2020 census will set the table for the next 10 years in the United States of America, in the 9th Congressional District of New York. If we don't stand up now, in 10 years, we can see the difference between our communities as they were 10 years ago to where they are today. And people are saying, well, this is not even reflective of us who've been living here for years. Well, we weren't counted then. We weren't counted 10 years ago.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is we have to disrupt that, and we have to be counted now.
Yes.
Absolutely, now more than ever.
When is the census taking place?
The census begins in January of 2020. You will be receiving notification. The actual enumeration begins in April. But right now, the Census Bureau is hiring people. And I want to encourage those in our community, particularly those who are influential, whether it's on their block, in their church, at their jobs. This is a great part-time gig, and if you're not employed currently at all, uh, you can work full-time. They're looking for people who come from our communities who are trusted by their neighbors to go out and help us to get those numbers that we need to be a reflection of the fact that we are here, that our children are born here, and that our grandparents die here. And everyone from that baby in the household to granny, at the nursing home needs to be counted.
So the message is there's no reason to be afraid.
No reason to be afraid.
Your future depends
Absolutely.
on this.
Absolutely. What are you afraid of? What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of ICE? Well, whether we fill out that form or not, ICE still is a part of our life and our society. If we want to change that, we then go out and vote. And that's coming up next year as well.
Yes, the importance of voting.
Absolutely.
We're going to have you back to talk about the importance of voting when we get closer to that.
Look forward to it.
I know lots of you Democrats want to make sure that when people go out to vote, there will be no Mr. Trump. I'm sorry, President Trump. There will be no longer President Trump. I understand that you're doing some work with the Black Caucus Census Task Force.
Yes.
What is that force?
Well, the Congressional Black Caucus realizes when you look at the map across this nation, you can see where the hardest to count communities are, and they are predominantly in districts that are represented by members of the Congressional Black Caucus. So we know that we've got to take leadership in this because right now we are 55 strong in the House of Representatives, and that's the largest number of people of African descent that have served in the United States Congress in its history. That could all be undone. And our voices are very important when you talk about policy and how it impacts communities of color, Black people. If without our voices, the conversation around reparations would never even be on the table. So we want to be able to make sure that we play an active role in helping our communities to see how important the census is, that there is power in this census, and that their participation is non-negotiable. They have to get involved.
No, you talk about an active role. You have played an active role in this Biometric Barriers Housing Act.
Yes.
Talk about this act. People are hearing about being afraid of their pictures being taken.
It's called the No Biometric Barriers to Housing Act.
What is that?
All right, so let's talk about biometrics.
Okay.
They are technologies that have been utilized to identify us, right? Some people may be familiar with in the airports, there's a commercial form of biometric identification called Clear, where you can use a scan of your retinas, you can use, I think some of them use fingerprints. These are markers that are uniquely yours. There are newer technologies called facial recognition technologies that in scanning the face claim to be able to determine who you are. And in New York City already, we've heard of a number of sort of private sector entities that are using facial recognition technology for various ways of identifying individuals.
Some devious as well.
Some devious, but primarily it's a surveillance of sorts. And I believe it invades privacy. So for someone who is working class, has no choice about where they live, living in a high-rise building that may be low income, and the management of the building decides no one's going to receive keys to get into this building anymore, everyone will submit to me their facial recognition materials, or we will determine based on your characteristics whether you're a resident here or not. That, to me, is a violation of our humanity, one. Two, our privacy. And so we've put this bill in because we have an example already, actually, called Atlantic Terminal, which is not a federal building, but it's currently trying to move to apply facial recognition technology in the admittance into its building. The residents have gotten legal representation, are in court now fighting that. And I think they have a great basis for doing that. First of all, facial recognition technology has already proven to be faulty when it comes to people of color. And the darker the skin, the more false positives that it picks up. With women in particular, there's a problem because of the characteristics that it's trying to capture. One, women change their hair all the time. Just ask me. Beyond that, the technology has not been perfected. And until that becomes a reality, people will be discriminated against. People will not be able to gain entrance into their own homes. And we can't have that. That's what this bill is about.
You're fighting on their behalf.
Absolutely.
How do people get involved in the fight and support your fight?
Well, right now we've got a bill on Capitol Hill. They can reach out to our office and say that they support this legislation. The more people we have supporting it, the more organizations we have supporting it, the more that we're able to get more and more members on board to move this legislation forward. We want to make sure we get some good sponsors on the Senate side so that it becomes law. Right now, we're at the very beginning stages.
And as you said earlier, you are unwilling to allow people in your district to be guinea pigs.
Absolutely, absolutely. It seems to me that the least powerful in society are always the guinea pigs. I don't see them.
And always the blacks.
Exactly.
You're saying you don't see.
Yeah, I don't see facial recognition technology being put into some of these Park Avenue apartments.
Yes. You know, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being my guest to discuss the impeachment and to discuss the other issues we talked about, facial recognition.
Right.
And to those of you who are watching this program, Brooklyn 45 would love to hear from you. If you know of a Brooklyn middle school or high school student with a grade point average of 90 or above, give us their name. We'll feature them right here to talk about their work at school. We hope this will encourage other students to be excellent as well. Brooklyn 45 is a registered 501c3 not-for-profit, and we welcome your support. And tell your friends about this program. On behalf of our Brooklyn 45 team, thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, viewers, for watching our program. I'm Sam Tate.